What up, YouTube? It's about May 30th. It's a little bit after 10 o'clock. I was trying to figure out before I pressed record how I was going to start this blog. It's pretty much entitled Metaphysical Addendum. And I basically wanted to speak, basically giving my opinion, my own opinion, as it regards to metaphysics. It's been something that I've been thinking about since I was a kid. But more so like I thought about it so much, I'm talking about like innately, that a person could bring any philosophical concept to me and I could tell them if they're correct or not. It could be something that I've never heard of. That's how much the subject is, I guess you could say, part of my natural understanding in a sense. But I entitled this Metaphysical Addendum because, basically addendum means add-on. So it's pretty much me putting my own signature out there and explaining where I'm coming from with it. Now, one of the reasons it was difficult to start this blog is because, I'm gonna put it like this. The topic is so complex, I feel like I have to explain my base thought. Let's put it like that. So I'm just going to talk and hopefully it makes sense as I keep going. Basically, my perspective on God. Now, I am not a theologian. I'm not a Satanist. And I do not consider myself an atheist either. You know what I'm saying? But like some language may help to explain where I'm coming from or my perspective. The first word is pantheism. Based on the definition of pantheism, it's basically all, like, I put it like this. What I think about God, I think God is a medium. That's the word that I use to describe God. I think God is a medium of what we see and don't see. So when thinking about the pantheist definition, you could say it kind of fits into that, but I don't want to, just describe myself and say, okay, I'm a pantheist. You know what I'm saying? I'm just somebody with my own perspective. So as far as like a metaphysical axiom, that's what I go by. I think God is the medium of what we see and don't see. Now, as far as like a soul, I think, like, my personal opinion, like I said, I thought about this stuff years back. And I'm like, okay, if you think about it, a soul is pretty much volition. But I like to split it into like three main categories. So I say, like, the words that I came up with to help explain where I'm coming from is functioning will and corporal will and then holistic will. Now, as far as like this vlog, by the time basically throughout this vlog, aside from like, science and the analysis that I'm gonna make, I'm going to give anecdotes that explains my definition of the soul or human will. You know what I mean? I first wrote Metaphysical Addendum when I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So that was about like 6 years ago. And again, I was just trying to like concretize and not necessarily synthesize, but provide a logical collective that explains or sort of puts into framework what I think. So that's what I did 6 years ago. But the thing is about that, I feel like it was a good essay. I put it on Facebook. The only thing is, and I don't say this out of arrogance, this is being honest, it don't completely encapsulate my complete view. But I do think I provide a good like 60 to 65% of what I think or whatnot. But before going further with that and break it down like further, the definitions of what I think a soul is, broken into three different subsets that we could call volition or human will, I want to go back and talk about like my, I guess you could say, introduction into the subject. It goes back to second grade. Ever since I was like in second grade, I would come home from school. Of course, I watched, the regular shows, Power Rangers, etc., all that type of stuff. But, it'd be like documentaries that would come on television. And nobody in the house really was interested in that type of stuff. But it always was something that used to catch my attention, especially if I see it on television or hear, somebody at school, like a teacher or something, mention it. You know what I mean? Or when they have like a conversation about something related to it, I'll listen. But it didn't have to always just be metaphysics. It could just be something cerebral. But going back to second grade, I used to watch, starting from second grade onward, I remember shows like later on, like Fact or Fiction, all kind of documentaries about aliens, ghosts, anything dealing with parapsychology. You know what I'm saying? So, like, in my opinion, again, going back to my frame, as far as my perspective, I consider all those things, like parapsychology, for example, I consider all of that to be a part of metaphysics. You know what I'm saying? I know when people think about metaphysics, they think about like the conventional philosophical stuff, which is cool. But like I say, I feel like I've mastered that subject so much, you could bring any concept to me and I could tell you if it's correct or not. Not if you're correct, but if the concept itself. It don't matter if it's an ancient concept. You know what I'm saying? But because I believe that all reality is of God, that means that anything a human being does is not outside of that. So even if you're talking about parapsychological feats, that's also within the frame of metaphysics, though it may be considered exotic to a lot of people. That's just how I view it. So going back to my childhood growing up, I used to watch all this stuff and study it and then get little books from school. Like I remember some of the books I used to check out. It'd be like books about aliens, just like a compilation of different stories. A lot of it was far-fetched, but I used to always try to pay attention to what made the most sense to me. Now, I'm thinking about this stuff, like I remember like questions I used to ask adults. I give one example. My sister-in-law, right? My niece's mother. I had to have been in like 4th grade by this time. You know, everybody came over to the house or whatnot. This is in Chicago at the time on 8th Street. And, you know, they was drinking coolers, just chilling or whatever, just talking stuff. And then the conversation came about, you know, eggs and sperm. You know what I'm saying? And she was making the point. She was talking to somebody else, though. I just happened to be listening. But she was making the point. She was like, something about a woman is more important or something like that because a woman produced or children come from a woman or something like that. And I was like, well, what about like the fact that sperm come from males? She was like, what about it? I was like, sperm comes from males, so a woman is pretty much, I didn't use the term harbor, but this is what I was saying back then. I'm like, a woman is pretty much a harborer of that. But if you want to trace the stages, it goes back to sperm. You know what I'm saying? And at the time, I felt a little good because I could tell I sparked their brains. They, you know, they tried to play it off like, you know what you're talking about. But then, you know, she brought it up later. But another question I had was like, you know them old cameras back in the day, the big ones with the backs and all that? One time, you know, because like what people used to do back in the day with the VCRs, hook up 2 VCRs and you'll be able to double record from a tape or whatnot and little things like that. So I used to mess around with that type of stuff, and then them little old cameras, I used to mess with it. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, what if somebody created or invented a lens, like a 360 lens, and the circumference of, well, not basically like the size of a front room? What if somebody invented a lens like that that circles all the way around, and then you played the footage? Like, just say somebody had the money to do that and they were successful, and then when you play the footage on screen, how does the image look? Like little stuff like that. I used to think about that. So skipping back forward, because I'm gonna try not to make this 3 or 2 hours like my other vlogs. Skipping back forward, going to like the definitions of what I think the subsets of human soul, or what I call volition. Okay, functioning will. That's the normal stuff. I think that's like anything that you do with your senses, you know, so, and your cognition, you know, bodily movements, all that type of stuff. All that is functioning will. But I think like functioning will can also transcend what is perceived to be like a human limitation. You get what I'm saying? And I got some examples. That's the first one that I'm going to go into. The second one is incorporeal will. I think incorporeal will is also a form of human volition, but it transcends functioning will fully. You get what I'm saying? Like, in other words, when it comes to incorporeal will, it's not something, how can I put it? It's pretty much abilities outside of the physical. Like, for example, like out-of-body experiences, telekinesis, telepathy, things like that. You know what I mean? I call that, or I put that under the category of and corporal will. The last one is holistic will. I call it holistic will because that in itself is beyond incorporeal will in the sense of not being tailored to a subject. Let's put it like that. Basically, like synchronicity, for example. If you're a person that believes in synchronicity like I do, to me, I put that under holistic will because that is more reflective of a collective. I get to that in a second. But I'm going to go all the way back to functioning will. As far as functioning will, to help explain what I mean, I'm going to give 3 solid anecdotes. The first one is a guy named Wim Hof. Right? He was a Dutch athlete. You can look him up on Wikipedia. He's a super popular dude, so I'm sure a lot of people know about him already. But as far as this guy, he got the ability to bear or endure extreme cold, different forms of extreme cold, you know, for long periods of time without his body being affected by it. Now, to me, that's functioning will. Now, granted, you know, he trained himself to be able to endure the cold incrementally or whatnot. But the whole point is this: for him to be able to do that and not suffer any fatal injuries or anything like that. In other words, I'm gonna get to the examples real quick. Okay, one of the things, because he did quite a few. He made the Guinness Book of World Records quite a few times. One of the things that stand out to me, it was in January of 2000. He, what was it? Climbed. It was sometime in 2000 because he did 2 things that I noticed. Later on, he had ended up climbing Mount Everest, but he climbed about like, what was it, 4.5 miles. He didn't complete his effort, but he lasted 4.5 miles climbing Mount Everest. And as far as his clothing, he ain't had nothing on but a shirt and some shoes at the time. Now, to me, think about it like, okay, if you climbing a mountain and you basically climbing 5 miles up the mountain, all you got to do is think about like the time as far as like the environment and how cold it is and how long it took him to climb the mountain. And then you deduct from the average human being who would have been crashed, you know what I'm saying? Probably like 15, no longer than 15 minutes after just standing there without a shirt, with just shorts and shoes on. Another thing he did, he swam. I think this was in 2007. Hopefully I'm not getting the date wrong. But he swam under ice, in cold ice, for like 62 yards. Like, to me, that's an example of functioning will, because it's going beyond the limitation of the body, but at the same time, it's not anything to, it's not that exotic in comparison to like popular feats of parapsychology. For example, like remote viewing, which is another thing that I'm gonna touch on as well, because I believe in all of that. So that's him, Wim Hof. Another guy, this happened in 2008 in Florida. It was a crash that happened. I believe it involved a female, and her arm ended up stuck under what was it, a Chevy Trail Blazer, but it was like over 4,000 pounds. And this guy's name was Chris Hickman. He ran to her aid, and he was able to lift this up. And they say he lifted it up about 12 inches, basically a foot off of the ground. And the people that witnessed him do that were some of the firefighters who came to their aid, or her aid pretty much, you know, so they watched him do that. That's the first one. To me, I call that functioning will, because as far as like, you know, me double checking on Wikipedia, the average a human being can really lift up is 1,000, maybe a little bit over 1,000, especially with bodybuilding. But kind of like Wim Hof, you know, those people are pretty much trained to that. They're trained to do that. You know, that's not something that's spontaneous. They spend years working out, lifting things in the gym, and also engaging in those tournaments and things like that. So you could be 250 pounds. You're just not going to come out of nowhere and lift up something that's damn near 1,000 pounds, let alone 500 pounds. You know what I'm saying? Almost twice your weight in itself. To me, that was significant. Like, 2015, you know, like I say, all this has always been my perspective. But as far as like when I was like, okay, let me go research and see about empirical evidence that kind of validates what I think, and if I can't find none, then I'm wrong. That right there, when I read about that, I'm like, okay, that makes I'm like that makes the most sense because of the situation and the circumstance of it. You know what I'm saying? I tried to like think in his mind, like, okay. In other words, there was an adrenaline rush that happened at the same time, but he's not thinking at the time like, oh shit, this Jeep this Chevy Trailblazer gonna be a little too heavy for me to lift up. It was like he just took action immediately. So I feel like if you measure that incident, even though it can't be like, you know, it was not like no scientific equipment or anything like that around, you could still take from the truth of the story itself and then analyze the events that took place, and you could immediately conclude, in other words, that was, even if you don't accept this completely, you can call it borderline. That was a borderline example of mind over matter. And then another one that happened after that, it's way before that. Now this one, I seen this one, like I was saying, you know, I used to watch this type of stuff ever since I was a kid or whatnot. This one, I remember seeing this as a child because there's footage of it. It's another guy, his name is Steve Cucks. Now, it was like a show in the 80s called Magnum P.I. or something like that. But the guy that was flying the helicopter during the filming of the show lost control somehow. He ended up crashing in like a little puddle of water. You know, it was shallow or whatnot. But, you know, when he crashed, as far as the position of his body, the helicopter was on top of him. Now, the helicopter didn't weigh as much as the Chevy Trailblazer, but it was still like 1,550 pounds or something like that. But another guy, his name was Warren Everall. He ran to the guy's aid. He was able to lift up the helicopter and lift up the helicopter enough to where the guy could be pulled from the wreckage or whatnot. He ended up saving him. Now again, that's another example right there. You got adrenaline pumping or whatnot. This guy's not thinking to himself, like, he's not thinking any thoughts that could be pessimistic as far as discouraging him from helping somebody. He right there in the moment, he panicked in terms of like, oh shit, somebody's in danger. He ran, and without considering like the variables in terms of how much this damn thing weighs as opposed to his body weight and everything else connected to that, he was able to lift that. To me, that's an example of functioning will. The next one, the second layer that I call incorporeal will. The first person that I'm gonna reference is Nina Kulagini, and I'm gonna reference her because I'm trying to keep this in chronological order as well as far as these anecdotes is concerned. Now, she was Russian. Now, she was somebody, you know, she kind of exhibited these abilities as a young person. Based on her story, when she was growing up, she'll notice, like, you know, whatever mood that she'll be in, the certain objects around her will be affected. Like, she'll notice that it'll move. Later on, she began to hone her abilities, and she got discovered by this. So as far as the government of Russia, within the government of Russia, people wanted to do like experiments to see if her abilities were real or what her telepathic abilities were real or whatnot. Now, that's something that I had heard about a long time ago too, but, you know, again, going back 6 years ago, I decided to, you know, research it and just, you know, look into it a little further, make sure that it's probable as far as the truth of her abilities. And I was also amazed as well. Now, as far as her, I think there were about like a total of 40 scientists, because they studied her for about 20 years. So it was like a total of about 40 scientists involved. But the notable thing to me is that two of the scientists that were involved were Nobel laureates, and they had won during the same year of one of her most significant experiences, which was in 1970. One, he was French. His name was Noel Louise. and he was a physicist. And the other guy, he was an astrophysicist, but he was Swedish. His name was, because he got a weird name, Hannes Alfven, Hannes, and then Alfven. Now, when you read about this stuff as far as her, before I go along, you're not going to find their names. You will find a mention of 2 Nobel laureate scientists that, that also studied her abilities as well. So I took it upon myself to go on Wikipedia and look up the list of people in the 21st century who received, 20th century, my bad, who received Nobel laureates. And I had to kind of scroll down through process of elimination. And it brought me to the year 1970. But of course, I had to look to the years prior to that. And after that, in case they're saying 2 people that worked with her ended up winning that prize, but later on or earlier, and I wasn't sure. But going through the list and the process of elimination, it became more than likely to me that these 2 guys are the ones that they're referring to. If I'm incorrect, when people listen to this vlog, type your comments and let me know, what information that I spewed that I didn't know what I was talking about or whatnot. But anyway, they both of them won the Nobel laureate in that same year in 1970, by the way. So I'm resting my case that these are the 2 individuals that they're talking about. And in me trying to further research on both of them, when I've typed in their names, it gave me a whole list of their biography and everything that they achieved and all of this. But no matter how many articles I went through, they never tied both of them to her. But I have a strong hunch, based on process of elimination, these are the 2 scientists that they're talking about. But anyway, as far as her, the feats that she performed, they would put objects in a glass case. And they did all of this on camera, by the way, I believe in a hotel. The footage is kind of messed up, but you can still see clear enough. They'll put objects in a glass case and she'll be able to move these objects. And then other things that she did similar to that, but they'll take a frog, and of course they'll have that equipment hooked up, and she was able to affect the heartbeat of a frog. Another one, they put a cracked egg in a glass full of water, and she was able to separate the yolk of the egg from the white itself in opposite corners. Another one was a psychiatrist himself. They didn't when I was reading about this, they never specified his name. And even when I read it about it again recently, just to make sure these facts is correct, they never specified the name of this guy. They only mentioned 1 scientist, but he was the person that witnessed her, I believe it was the frog or whatnot. But anyway, as far as this psychiatrist, she was able to affect his heartbeat as well, and it almost brought him into cardiac arrest. And based on what I read, he became a believer as well. Now, here's the thing. As far as Nina Kulagini, of course she gonna get critics and stuff like that, and what she did get, but to me, I found this to be notable and kind of validated to me the veracity of her story. It was a newspaper, some newspaper in Russia, to where you had other people, prominent names, claiming that, she cheated or whatnot, or basically that the results of, basically that she didn't have these abilities, like it was a facade or whatnot. But she ended up going to court and suing these people, and then they said she had a partial victory or whatnot for defamation, which means what? The results of her studies were not nullified or disproven, or enough doubt wasn't cast upon it. I'm talking about substantial doubt, in other words. So I feel like, as far as telepathy, and there's so many other cases too, but as far as with telepathy, for example, that is definitely true, and I call that incorporeal will, being able to manipulate energy around objects. I feel like this. And you think about particles and that type of stuff, you want to give yourself a re-chemistry lesson, that's cool. But you think about particles, the most basic atom has an electron, a neutron, and a proton, right? And of course it has a nucleus. If you're talking about the electrical components of it more so, like the electron and the proton, that means regardless of, like when you think about the space of shit, like take away hydrogen or oxygen, take away the gaseous molecule, take away all that type of stuff. Or not the gaseous molecules, but like, you know, the ionic particles and all that type of stuff. Somehow, and her doing this with her brain, she's able to manipulate matter. But I'm looking at it like you're not just simply moving something within a glass case. It's the matter that's around this object as well, which means what? As a principle, it definitely has to be some type of manipulation as far as her being able to wield these subatomic particles to where she can manipulate the environment around the I guess you could say the proximate environment around an object, and then cause that to become like I was going to say a condensed force, but basically manipulate this energy around an object in order to cause it to move in whatever direction that you will it in. Now, as far as her, as far as the drawbacks, like the side effects, they did say like, you know, she would like her body temperature would rise, she would become dizzy, drowsy, her blood pressure would become high, which to me is kind of similar to some of Robert Monroe's experiments. I'm gonna get to him in a second. You know, as far as you know, the results that he yielded, even though I don't look at him, to me, Robert Monroe is not, I don't like his methods. His methods is not substantial enough to me. I'm gonna get to him in a second because he's another person, you know, within an anecdote that I'm gonna bring up, who studied altered states of consciousness, but he was more so concerned with out-of-body experiences rather than like, you know, telepathy or anything like that. So that's the anecdote as far as Nina Kulagini. Now, I'm gonna bring up Pam Reynolds, but I'm gonna go ahead and mention Robert Monroe because he's like one of those people. It's quite a few of them. I guess you could say pioneers, at least in the United States. You know what I'm saying? Definitely in this field of parapsychology. You know, studying altered states of consciousness. As far as Robert Monroe, because you got Robert Monroe, you got another guy named General Albert Stubblebine, and he was also connected to the Stargate project. I'm gonna touch on that too. You got another guy named Jim Shannon, who also was the person who directly influenced the last guy that I just mentioned, Albert Stubblebine. You got another guy named Lieutenant Frederick Holmes. You know what I mean? He was actually the person that was in charge of the Stargate program. Now, the other guy that I brought up, the general, as far as Albert Stubblebine, I'm going to get to him in a second. But he had a program that he put together as well where he studied altered forms of consciousness. And when I was reading more about the Stargate program, again, just reiterating, you know, they were saying like this guy, Albert Stubblebine, was also like a key sponsor in the Stargate program, even though he had his own shit going on himself as far as studying altered states of consciousness. That's the most that they said about him in regards to like, you know, the Stargate program. But these are things that was going on at the time. And as far as like people studying this, and these are some of the pioneers. And again, as far as Stargate, well, I'm gonna keep it in order. Going back to Robert Monroe. All right. I know he attended or graduated from Ohio State University, right? Later on, you know, during World War II, he wasn't able to enlist or whatnot because he had an injury that he incurred as a teenager, basically as a young adult, some ulcers that he had. So instead of going to the army, he ended up working for like the NAA, the National Aeronautic Association or whatever, because he was into things related to aviation or whatnot. When he got hired by those people, he ended up working for it was basically like when he got hired by them, he ran a radio station, a weekly radio station. And the whole aim of the radio station was just basically to introduce young people into the field of aviation or whatever. Because actually before he got hired by the National Aeronautic Association, he worked for some type of manufacturing company also, but they were selling like simulation prototypes, you know, like aviation simulation prototypes. And then later on, that's when he got hired by the NAA and worked on a radio program. The program was called Scramble, by the way. So then, like, let me see, I want to say later on after that, he established his own corporation. They called it Ram Enterprise. So it's basically just under this corporation, it was a collection of radio shows that he ran, pretty much. It was about like, well, a network of radio shows, more so. And it was about like 28 of them. During the same time, that's when he started, you know, becoming interested in the knowledge of altered states of consciousness, and he started studying it himself. And around like 1958 is when he first had his first out-of-body experience that he wrote about, like almost 20 years later, in 1971. And I think he claimed it took him about like 7 to 9 weeks or whatever that he finally had this experience. As far as his experience, it was similar, some of the details, to what Pam Reynolds had went through in 1991, as far as like the initial stages of her experiences. Now, before I go further, I'm gonna say, like, as far as Pam Reynolds, just ahead of time, and just like other people such as the general that I'm gonna go into, like Albert Stubblebine, people like that, I give more, and Nina Kulagini that I spoke about, I give more credit to the results of their studies and their stories itself. As far as this guy, I'm not saying like he didn't have an out-of-body experiences, but just because I got like I ain't gonna say a distaste, but I have a strong disfavor for his methods in trying to study altered states of consciousness. I get to it in a second. But anyway, as far as him, he had this experience in 1958, and then he became more engulfed in studying this. And then what, 1962, that's when he moved his company to Virginia or whatnot. Later on, he changed the name. He was still studying altered states of consciousness. But you know, it's like some of the like as far as the technology, he applied some of the technology as well. But the main thing he'll use like an electrode or whatnot, and they call it electrodermal activity, as far as like the process itself. And basically, what they'll do, they'll take electrodes, and they use mostly people's palms, fingers, and feet because of the sweat glands. Because the majority of your sweat glands are in your palms, your hands, and your feet, pretty much. And all they'll do is just like hook these electrodes up to people in these areas, and then measure the electric activity. Because whenever a person experiences some type of startlement or whatever it is, like, in other words, like, his methods measured more so like